Hello and welcome. I'm here now with my second lecture on the Holy Spirit in mission. And the idea, of course, is, as you know, in week 7 that we think pneumatologically about mission. And in doing so, that we explore the scope of mission. We can see where the Holy Spirit takes us, so to say. And so last time, what we talked about was the empowering spirit in mission. First, with a basis in both Luke and Acts, where the Holy Spirit is shown as an empowerment for witness. And then we also discovered that ministering in the Holy Spirit means bringing liberation to people and means ministering to the marginalized, and something that we can see very strongly as a repeated theme, particularly in the Gospel of Luke. And so our focus today for this lecture here is the dialogical spirit in mission. And so this is another theme that is of great interest, especially for Pentecostal scholars, as we will see in a moment. The idea that the Holy Spirit enables us in a special way to interact with people from other cultures and other religions. And so the biblical basis for this really is also in the book of Acts. So not surprisingly, this is very common for Pentecostal theologians, that they base their theology on Luke, Acts, on these 2 volumes that were written by Luke, and they are of course narrative, and in that way are quite different from Paul's writings, for example. And so when we talk about the dialogical spirit, especially in the research of Amos Young, this is very much connected to the Pentecost account as recorded in Acts chapter 2, where it says, "All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. When they heard the sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment, because each one heard their own language being spoken." And so this is the biblical foundation, especially for the theological work that Amos Young has been doing. And it's the many tongues of Pentecost is a phrase that he repeats in frequently in a number of his writings. And so I want to use Amos Young's work as a theological basis to explain this idea. And so a few words about himself and his biography. Amos Young was born in 1965 in Malaysia, and then later his parents emigrated to the United States, and so he grew up largely here in the US, did his PhD at Boston University, and then taught at Regent University School of Divinity, which is a Pentecostal school. And now he is professor of theology and mission here at Fuller Seminary at the School of Intercultural Studies, as well as the director of the Center of Missiological Research, CMR. And so Amos Young has published many articles and books. One of them is here, The Dialogical Spirit, and that's where I also get the idea from for the title that I have chosen for this lecture, which is the Dialogical Spirit. And in this book, he first makes an argument that for Christians to minister in the 21st century, we need to be aware that there have been several significant shifts that have taken place. And so he says that we now live in a context with certain requirements. And this context he describes as being post-foundationalist, post-Christendom, post-secular, and post-modern. And so the idea is that we can't argue in the same way as maybe people did in the middle of the 20th century or in the 19th century, but that our context has changed significantly. And what that includes is that there are many different viewpoints, and that the idea of one absolute truth that could be readily accepted is just not there anymore. So you cannot just assume that people will believe as you do just because you present a certain argument or a set of beliefs to them. And so what he thinks is that starting with the Spirit theologically and methodologically opens up the kind of dialogical inquiry so important for theological thinking and formulation in the 21st century context. So that's from the introduction of his book, The Dialogical Spirit. So the idea is very much that how we interact with people, and that also includes evangelism and other missions-related activities, cannot be based on confrontation, but needs to be based on dialogue, which includes our willingness to learn from the other. And so what he emphasizes in his book is theology in conversation with science, because that's also a big influencing factor in our world today in the 21st century, as well as other religions, specifically Buddhism, and that's related to his background because he grew up in Malaysia and within the Chinese minority where many people are Buddhists, and his parents converted from Buddhism to Christianity and then became ministers with the Assemblies of God. So that's his background, and this biographical background of Amos Yong, of interacting with people from other cultures and religions and thinking about identity and what it means to be a Christian with that kind of non-Western background, is something that also comes across in this lecture here, The Holy Spirit and the Middle Way. And it's a lecture you can listen to if you go on that YouTube link, and you will find that it's divided into 5 main points. So Amos Yong begins by formulating the original theological problem, something that he explored in his PhD dissertation from the year 1999, which was entitled Discerning the Spirits, a Pentecostal Charismatic Contribution to Christian Theology of Religions. And then he gives an overview of the theological framework he originally formulated, which is a Pentecostal theology of religions. Thirdly, he details the application of this framework to the Buddhist-Christian dialogue. And then as a 4th point, he documents some of the criticisms that have arisen to his proposals. And the 5th, he summarizes the major trajectories of where his work has brought him to so far. And that was in 2012. So you can see that he's reflecting on quite an extensive time, over a decade, of thinking about these topics. And of course, one of the difficult questions is the question of discernment, right? So yes, there is this idea of engaging in dialogue and being willing to listen to the other, to the religious other, and learn about their religion on their own terms. But on the other hand, of course, there is also the question of discernment and being conscious that not only is the Holy Spirit at work in our world, but there are also other spirits that are against what God desires at work, and so that leads to some complex issues and questions that are not easy to be answered. And so if you are interested in this question on the Holy Spirit and discernment, you can also turn to an article written by Dr. Kirsten Kim, which is available on our e-reserves. And so with that, I want to turn to some of the readings from your weekly readings. So we have Timothy Tennant here, who writes, "At Pentecost, the birthday of the church, a small group of Jewish followers of Jesus are baptized into the reality of the infinite translatability of the gospel for every language and culture. In the theology of Luke, the empowerment of the Holy Spirit for global mission is linked to the infinite translatability of the Christian gospel." So here we have Timothy Tennant affirming that, yes, the gospel, of course, is not only meant for one culture or for one ethnic group, but for all languages and cultures. And that's something that evangelicals can relate to relatively easily. Now here we come to a more complex issue that Ma and Ma point to when they say, in fact, ecumenical circles have raised a challenging question. Is the Spirit present outside of the Church? Based on the theology of creation, it is not difficult to respond positively. However, the question will inevitably lead to a more challenging one. Would the Spirit work in cultures and in other religions? So here we can see that that the Mass, as Pentecostal missionaries and scholars, are pushing this issue a bit further, right? Because it's relatively easy to say, oh yeah, sure, the Spirit of God is at work in creation. Yes, absolutely, the Spirit of God is at work through other languages and in other cultures. But then religion is often an essential part of culture. And so how do we deal with that as Christians? Another thought here from Scott Sundquist and in his book, Understanding Christian Mission, where he says, I spent a year trying to decide where to put the discussion on religions in a missiology book that focuses on a Trinitarian approach to mission. It was in a moment of sudden insight that I realized that our struggle with religions is that we usually start with Jesus, which is not a bad idea, rather than the Holy Spirit, which I think is a better idea. And so this parallels some of the things that Amos Yong is saying also in the lecture that I just mentioned, where he says that he acknowledges that pneumatology and Christology belong together and cannot be separated, but at the same time he encourages us to focus on pneumatology when we engage with other traditions and other religions, because it opens doors and it is less exclusive than when we focus on the person of Jesus, who of course said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by me. And so we're coming back to Amos Yong here, this time from his book, Missiological Spirit, which is part of your reading, where he says, if the Spirit's creative reach stretches across the cosmos, and if the Spirit's redemptive work covers, at least potentially, all flesh, then a pneumatological theology of mission includes at least also the following domains. 1, a theology of culture that sees the cultural dimension of human life already imbued with the Spirit's presence and activity, thereby enabling the inculturation and contextualization of the gospel message. And 2, a theology of religions that views the religious dimension of human life as pointing to and awaiting fulfillment in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So here again, we have this idea that, yes, of course, we do affirm the Holy Spirit being at work in other cultures, and certainly contextualization is a theme that is now widely accepted in missiological circles. But again, if it comes to other religions, it becomes more and more complex, and a lot of work will have to be done there. And that's why Amos Yong also in that lecture affirms that he thinks that comparative theology is one of the top priorities of doing theology in our time. And so with that, I want to point you to your learning activity. Your learning activity after this lecture is that we encourage you to read once more through the Lausanne Covenant and the Cape Town Commitment, and this time with a particular focus on how the Holy Spirit is portrayed in these two documents. And then we would like you to write down some of the differences you have noted. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. This is it from my side, and you are now ready to continue your learning through the lecture given by Dr. Kirsten Kim. So I appreciate your participation in this class, and may God bless you as you continue to study. Bye for now.